Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. For today's episode, we have several amazing channelings. These are some of my favorites, talking about everything from spiritual evolution to complexity and the way that the spiritual channel evolves and how to evaluate this information. Much of this is newer channelings that are fairly recent. We begin with the channeling delivered on April 13th, 2022. I am Quo, and am with this instrument. We greet you each and every one in the love and in the light of the one infinite Creator. It is an honor and a joy to be asked to join this group of seeking once again. It is a part of our spiritual journey to do so, to become a part of your spiritual journey by blending our energies to help each other to move along that path of unity, of love and light. At this time, we would ask if there is a question that we may utilize as a means to share more of this path of love, light, and unity. Gary asks, our website llresearch.org indicates that new channelings get much more traffic than older channelings. I assume that readers think that the more current channelings will be more relevant or important, that newer equals better. Maybe they even harbor the notion that the Confederation has updated their message over the years. Outside of any difference in the abilities of instruments, are newer channelings somehow better or more pertinent than older channelings? Can you speak to the dynamic and difference, if any, between current and past channeling transcripts? I am Quo, and am aware of your query, my brother. It is an interesting query, and as always, we hope that our reply might be useful to each listening ear and heart, and eye that perceives our words. But we would ask that you be discriminating in the words and concepts that you accept, if they are helpful to you. If they are not, please feel free to put them aside for the time being. The perennial favor allows us to speak more freely to the substance of your query. We find that as your planetary population moves ever more closer in harmony with the concepts of seeing the Creator in all, seeking the Creator in all, becoming the Creator in some fashion in the conscious spiritual journey, there is a greater acceptance of this foundation of philosophy that then allows more construction of thought in concept to be offered in a manner which meets the growing apprehension of previous concepts and thoughts. Each entity upon your planetary sphere at this time, either consciously or subconsciously, desires to know why it is here on Earth at this time. It may not appear to many that there are spiritual yearnings within the soul of each of the 8 billion entities upon your planetary sphere, for there is so much division of thought and emotions, principles, and the way to live the life that it would seem there is no kind of generally accepted philosophy of what you have called the conscious seeker of truth. And yet each, by seniority of vibration, has incarnated on the earth at this time to make that spiritual journey. Each has planned preincarnatively to learn those lessons that remain, that will allow the heart to be opened in unconditional love, so that all may be seen as the Creator, and all be offered a service to reveal more and more of the Creator in each moment, in each thought, in each word, in each deed. Yet there are so many who are not aware of this consciously at all, and yet there are energies of the subconscious nature, the unconscious guides, the higher self that point out various opportunities in the daily round of experience that any seeker may be able to become aware of and utilize in the spiritual journey. As this occurs more and more frequently for the conscious seekers of truth, the questions that are asked, such as this question, become more, shall we say, particularized or advanced along a certain train of thought, the spiritual path of each seeker. Each has the continuing question of how this journey may be undertaken, how to utilize catalyst more efficiently, how to be more of service in every breath one takes and every step one takes. There's a great conscious swelling of interest, a bubbling up of those pre-incarnated choices that are now becoming known in some fashion consciously to those who have been on the spiritual path for a good deal of what you call time. As these more experienced seekers of truth encounter layer upon layer of knowledge concerning their spiritual journeys of service to the one Creator in all, then the questions become more relevant and give them an opportunity to refine their understanding and practice of being of service to others. These questions then are fed into this circle of seeking and are the focus of our channeling at each meeting of this circle and of the CC circle as well, the subgroup of this circle, so that the responses we're able to make also take on a refined aspect and become more centered within the heart, centered within that great power of love that flows from the great central sun into each entity throughout the infinite creation, leaving it to each entity to be able to perceive more and more clearly this power of unconditional love that has made all that there is. Thus, we are then able to speak in more concise and hopefully fulfilling terms that give each seeker the answers that are perceived in a way that speed that seeker's journey forward, or shall we say inward to the one that exists within all. Thus, you receive information that may be more palpable, more usable, and more a part of each seeker's daily rounds of experience, as everything then becomes rarefied, purified, inspired, and partaking of more and more of the love of the one infinite creator that exists within each being and each iota of the creation. Thus, the queries, the responses, the utilization of the responses, all are upward spiraling as lines of light, making their way back into unity with the one infinite creator. At this time, we would transfer this contact to the one known as Austin. We are known to you as those of Quo. Austin channeling, we are Quo, and we are now with this instrument. May we ask if there is another query? Gary says, yes, thank you, Quo, for the response to the previous instrument. It's sufficiently intriguing that I want to spontaneously follow the same line of thought. First, by sharing a little bit about what prompted that question. Seeing that readers tend to go to the new channelings is a bit saddening to me, because there are a plenitude of gems and riches in channelings of decades past, particularly thanks to the superlative abilities of the one known as Carla. I find that she was able to give a depth and soaring height to the Confederation's message that is, to me, infinitely inspiring. So I grokked from your channel through the previous instrument that there can indeed be a progression of your channeling from fundamentals to building on the fundamentals to moving into advanced concepts, particularly as humans to whom you are speaking and channeling themselves become more advanced in their understanding and refine their questions and so forth. Yet at the same time, isn't there much to your message that is eternal, that is the same now as it was in the 80s, as it would have been in 6,000 years ago? Isn't much of the third density journey in making the choice of service to self or service to others timeless? Isn't much of your job to creatively repackage, so to speak, those same fundamental principles of spiritual evolution and new permutations? Can you speak to this, please? We are Quo, and we are aware of this query, my brother. We appreciate this further questioning upon this topic, for this exploration and reiteration of this theme allows us to speak in a deeper sense and more freely, releasing some bounds of what is known as the law of confusion. We find innate within your query a very rich and potent, what may be called or perceived as, paradox, particularly relevant to the third density experience. That is the notion that what all seekers are seeking, and what we of the Confederation of Planets in service to the one infinite creator wish to illuminate through instruments such as those within the circle, is indeed eternal. It is indeed infinite, and it is indeed all part of the one infinite creator. It follows a certain logic that whatever may be spoken to in this seeking will be pointing towards that eternal principle, the eternal nature of that which is being sought. Yet the seeming paradox lies in the necessity of the third density mind to grapple with this illusion that shields the truth of this eternity from the seeker within the third density. In this way, we may say that you are correct, that our desire when interacting with this group, not just in this iteration, but in all previous iterations within what may be called lineage of channeling circles, is to speak to the most central and eternal truths. And it is our desire to speak in a way that such truths may remain relevant to seekers in further generations, and even many, many years after the words are spoken. Yet, as you might observe in examining the progression of the channeling circles and the contacts made by this group, You will find that as your society itself grows and shifts, and the collective consciousness of your peoples find new perspectives, new interrelationships with each other and with the world around your peoples, that there are new avenues of thought available, new potential ways to speak to the eternal truths present from the very beginning of all seeking. And so this is the key to seeming paradox spoken to, in that as channeling circles such as this progress, there is a growing ability of us to speak through instruments in a way that may be understood in new ways. This is also made more possible because of the overall spiritual evolution of your society. We understand through this instrument's perception that many people feel as though your society is perhaps stagnant or even regressing in spiritual awareness. Yet we may report that from our perspective, though it may seem to your veiled illusory perception that there is a stagnant or regressive nature to your spiritual evolution, the reality is that there is actually a great acceleration of spiritual awareness among your peoples, and a growing desire within the hearts of your social memory complex to seek more genuine connection with each other and with the world around you, to grow the love in your hearts. This acceleration, though unseen by many within the veil, allows us to connect with you in more meaningful ways, not just through this circle, but in other methods and other means. We would like to encourage all seekers who read our words to attempt to look beyond those things that may be relevant in the present moment and seek the deeper truths within, but not dismiss the necessity of making connections through what may seem to be transient or timely, for it is through this progression of understanding the world and the events experienced by the seekers who read our words in a more immediate sense or more recent sense that these eternal truths may be referenced and found through the illusion and through these seemingly transient concepts. We encourage this instrument, for he is feeling somewhat inadequate to the task of this evening, and affirm that our thoughts were captured and presented with some accuracy, and we relieve him of his service. For this evening, as we transfer this contact to the one known as Trisha, we are those of Quo. Trisha channeling, we are those of Quo, and we are now with this instrument. May we ask if there is another query at this time? Yes, Quo. A preliminary question. First, I'm considering one of two different questions. One either about the in-streaming of fourth density, or the other about simplicity on the path. My free will, of course. Would Quo offer any guidance as to which path might be more conducive for this circle and this particular instrument? We are aware of this preliminary query, my brother, and we would advise you to follow your intuition. Is there a query that speaks to your heart more tenderly, that you feel in what you would call your gut a stronger magnetic or familiar resonance to? Is there a query that calls to you more loudly than another? And with that guidance, we will then ask if there is a secondary query that we may speak at this time. Thank you, Quo. That was helpful. That does it. Now, apologies in advance for the poorly formed question. I think better with a keyboard in front of me. I am considering how complexity in the mind of the third density entity may obscure the truth of unity. The third density entity may become lost in the weeds, so to speak, of a complex world and miss the oneness of all things, which makes me think about the way that truly advanced evolution is often linked to simplicity. And I'm considering the dynamic tension between complexity and simplicity. And I'm wondering if, Quo, you can speak to the journey of simplicity through an infinitely complex world, such as ours. We are those of Quo, and we are aware of this query, my brother, and we thank you for this. Additionally, the instrument is feeling thankful for the question as well. Indeed, this particular configuration, which you call your illusory reality, which may sound like an oxymoron, is one of great complexity. We comprehend the immense amount of steps and efforts the people on this planet have put in place for themselves to further distance self from other self, the various and seemingly infinite facets of the egoic identity, or the way one observes one's environment, or the way one classifies one's experience, is like building a pyramid upside down, starting from this single point and then building blocks on top of one another until you have what may seem to be a massive web or tangle that potentially obscures one's view of the beautiful clear sky. We don't mean to convey that this tangle is a negative or harmful aspect of your illusion, because this complexity grifts those within this density ample opportunity to rediscover unity, remember love, redefine its own reality illusion, if you will. So complexity is a potent teacher, a ripe petri dish, for lack of better phrasing, for the entity to grow and evolve and progress in ways that have the potential to move towards simplicity. Perhaps the complexity that you witness, that you experience, that you dance within. Perhaps when looking upon that complexity with the eyes of love, the love that is unconditional, one can begin to see the channel towards simplicity. The entity that approaches the many layers of experience on this planet with an open heart and open mind and open arms is an entity who is placing itself on the path towards the one, the only, the all that is, and that being love. We make this instrument smile because we understand that not every situation or experience you may have feels as though one can approach it simply with love. There are situations in your experience where the entity may feel a need to protect itself or distance itself, or even react in a way that feels as though it's in opposition to the concept of love. We understand that these difficulties persist in your density on your planet. We do not ask that we correct this instrument. We are not struggling that you realign yourself in such dramatic ways, in such drastic fashion, so as to only operate out of love in that unconditional, pure form. We realize that this is not fully your role here at this time as an extension of the Creator, and within this magical stage, you are performing, if you will, at times villain and at times victim, hero and anti-hero. So please do not fret and worry oneself over this idea of always without exception, approaching the illusion in every situation with only love. While it is an extremely honorable goal, we simply stress that grace be practiced for the self. The mere intention to attempt to approach situations with an open mind and an open heart are truly steps, sometimes leaps, in the direction towards simplicity. Please honor that intention and honor those third density feelings that pop up. Observe them and accept those situations where perhaps you were unable to fully step forward with only love in your heart. Realizing that we have allowed this instrument to talk a bit off topic, we shall get back to this idea of simplicity and how that may be obtained. Though obtained is not the word we wish to give to this instrument must smile again, because we are giving her the image of a big boat with a big wheel at the back, with the captain would turn one way or the other and watch the sails turn with it, perhaps overwhelming her to say that we will provide suggestions as how one may direct oneself towards simplicity and a simpler life. So while there may be complexity afoot at all moments in your life, there are many pathways to simplicity. The perhaps most obvious among this group being the practice of meditation, when an entity is able to fully allow its thoughts and its worries to subside, to quiet, to release their grip upon the entity is allowed the space to recognize simplicity, to practice in those moments of silence, peace. The peace that is seemingly inherent with simplicity may be discovered. And that peace may begin to find a way into the entity's heart, into the entity's being in such a way that it becomes not so much tangible but observable, and begins to accrue weight in a way that the entity can begin to walk away from the practice of meditation with this peace. That peace that can be exuded from within this being outward, creating an environment of peace, of simplicity. And surely, when the environment about one is tended to with love and care, this peace may multiply, may strengthen, may become more vibrant, may become more dense. And then we speak of environment. We speak not only of the three-dimensional sensory environment, we speak also of the energetic environment. An entity who tends to this garden waters the seedlings, removes the weeds of distraction or separation, of conflict, and fertilizes the nutrient-rich ground of wholesome peace and serenity. They will surely find that the blooms that appear over time are bountiful, colorful, and ever-growing, And just in that way, that peace and serenity translates to a falling away of those things which can create extra complexity in the entity's life. Not to say that the entity will give up all complex or distracting items about their environment or their experience, but that they will begin to see the simplicity that runs underneath the love that is the nutrient-rich ground, that life-giving force, if you will, that binding agent, and the entity can then more clearly see, more clearly accept, and move towards a more compassionate and focused, if you will, incarnation, one that is allowing the simplicity of love and unity to guide the spirit rather than the extraneous decorations about the life that many upon your planet find themselves distracted by. We like to end our sharing on this topic with a simple message that all within this illusion are capable of finding that path towards simplicity. We realize that so much in your experience seems to detract from that simplicity, but we stress that every soul is so fully capable and are held with such love and such grace. If the self could allow itself that same love and grace and allow itself to practice moments of presence and realize the pure power, the loving energy that is within, then the entity may begin that process, that journey towards simplicity. At this time, we take our leave of this instrument and transfer this contract to the one known as Kathy. We are those of Quo. We are those of Quo, and we are now with this instrument. May we ask if there is another query to which we may respond? Yes, Quo. We have one from S who writes, how can we discern the lessons we have to learn and karma we have to deal with in the present that we earned in the past incarnations? And I would add on to his question, not just how can we discern them, but how can a positive entity then relate to these lessons in a healing way? We understand the query, my brother. We see the two parts to this query. The first being about the nature of discernment, of lessons of what is termed in your illusion karma. The second part having to do with the response to such discernment of lessons in a healing way, and we find this as a most constructive and helpful query. Discernment is the faculty of both heart and mind, we may say. Discernment is rightfully employed on these two levels of an entity's experience when examining such questions having to do with lessons of an entity's wide-ranging experience upon this planet. Lessons which could be in the present time or in other times, other realities. When the heart and mind together representing the power of love within an entity combined with the power of the intelligence of the entity are used together in a perceptive fashion, then lessons which are found in the smallest and largest of experiences, they become clear. The discernment of patterns may become clear to an entity using both heart and mind, perceiving an experience repeating over and over in an entity's life experience, so that the heart and mind of the entity may clearly see or feel that a lesson is there to be understood. A lesson is there speaking to the heart and mind of the entity. A pattern, a repetition may reveal such. The pattern could be of what is called catalyst or circumstances, which bring up in an entity a response, an awareness, an understanding that something here must be dealt with, something here is calling my attention, to use quotation marks to indicate an entity speaking within itself about circumstances that are serving as a kind of mirror into which the entity may look and see the nature of a lesson appearing over and over again. A lesson may appear in other ways, perhaps more pleasant. An entity may notice that when an action is taken out of compassion and love for another self, the good that arises from that chosen action, and if such repeats itself and shows itself in that mirror of which we spoke a moment ago, the entity may begin to see a lesson appearing when love and compassion are offered. A healing or another positive result, such as friendship or gratitude, results from such action offered in this way. Both the heart and mind are perceiving part of the entity working together to discern what the higher part of the entity, the spirit, knows is well for the entity to perceive at that time, so that the lesson can be received and understood and used for healing. Whether the circumstances are ones of a more pressing, difficult, or negative nature, or whether the circumstances are as we just described, ones that entail loving compassion offered and engendering more love and compassion. In either case or any in between, the entity is learning from the power of the repetitive nature of such experiences. An awareness then grows within the entity's heart and mind, and a connection with the spirit part of the mind-body-spirit complex is made, so that spirit, mind, and heart work together in an enlarged fashion to understand the significance of the lesson. The wholeness of the entity, realizing that itself is larger than any one of these experiences, understands that it may be well to choose to shift the approach to the life to be able to embrace a new way of being, that would be the healing way of which the query spoke. This is the way that growth and change, the upward spiral into love and compassion, and the growth spiritually of the entity higher and higher in its lifetime and lifetimes to come happens. For each situation has the potential, whether from difficult catalysts to loving compassion being received and given, to assist the entities to shift and grow in this positive healing way on upon an upward path. This is a most fortunate journey than that an entity, a seeker, can take to make the most of lessons that become clear to the heart and mind, to utilize the power of the spirit, inviting that such into heart and mind to choose the healing path within self. The light and love of the Creator are always available within the entity to assist you with this journey. It is what you may call a journey of becoming that Creator, for accepting self is a part of these choices once the lessons are understood, and that is the healing way. We thank you for this query, and we trust this question for this moment and what you call time has been addressed. We are those of Quo, and we now transfer the contact to the one known as Gary. We are those known to you as the principle of Quo. It has been some time since we exercised this instrument, but we find the mind-body-spirit complex in ready shape to be of service as an instrument and as a partner, so that we, the members of the Confederation of Planets, in the service to the One Creator, may remind you, and all seekers who may encounter our words, of that which you already know within your hearts. And below the level of thought, shall we say, at this time we open to any query that the circle may have. We are those known to you as the principle of Quo. I have one Quo. Ra describes the primary method of second density spiritual evolution being that of forming relationships with third density entities, such as with pets. But a planet without third density entities still has to progress through second density and into third. So using our own planetary experience as an example, can you describe what methods of evolution the sublogos built into the second density experiences to aid progression? And if there is anything that we can learn from those methods as third density entities born from those second density conditions. We are those known to you as Quo, and we feel a sense of delight in being able to speak to a small degree to the workings of the curriculum that you and we and all upon the grand stage, undergirded by the grand mystery, move through on our journey of self-realization and service to the One. As the questioner mentioned, one of the most potent services that the third density being can offer the second density entity is the clothing of that second density being with a sense of identity that is distinct from its surroundings, its species, or to whatever sort of mass identity or understanding which it may identify. This service then helps to catalyze the awakening of the spirit complex within the second density entity and the dawning awareness of self as a self. However, as the questioner has posted, second density entities evolving from the first density upon a planet which has not yet achieved the third density vibration nevertheless succeeded in learning the lessons of densities, such that they are then able to graduate and move beyond the boundary of second into third density to become whatever the outer chemical form may house that which you may understand to be human consciousness. By what methods do these second density beings learn the lessons of self-awareness without the investment of the higher stage of intelligence of the third density? You may find that within these second density being catalysts, which may not be all too unfamiliar to yourself, particularly that of the interaction with others of its environment, the second density entity has a series of prerogatives, objectives, imperatives, at the base of which, of course, is survival, built onto which is the impulse to procreate, to in certain instances protect or care for others of its kind or of its family or of its progeny. and built on top of that to increasingly find its expression as a specialist in whatever way. Perhaps as the beaver builds the dam or cuts the wood, or speaking of the woodpecker slams its head into the tree in order to bore holes in search for food, or more perhaps pleasing to your third density ears, the song which the bird has perfected for itself, which on a biological level may serve to attract the mate so that it may fill its own biological drives, but which has higher purpose in terms of its expressions of self. Incrementally, gradually, often imperceptibly to the second density entity, tiny nuanced steps are made which awaken that dormant awareness within the second density being. The bird perhaps becomes more aware of the way in which its particular notes sound, as distinct from others of its kind, or aware perhaps the way in which it produces the music which vibrates from its form of vocal cords to fill the air. Innumerable are the ways that second density being, particularly those of the higher range, may find this self-expression as a function of movement through and survival within its environment. Particularly potent for the second density entity is also the relationship which it enjoys or does not enjoy with others of its environment. Those in this circle are aware of the complex social relationships, hierarchies, and dynamics that certain species may form among dolphins, chickens, those known to you as canines, and so forth. These sorts of relationships have a yeasty way of reflecting back to the second density being its individual nature, as it growingly understands its role in the group or as a lone entity moving through its environment. As with progression of the third density being, there is a growing sense of what we may call ability or power that becomes available to the second density being who becomes aware of itself. Its parameters are more limited than that which the third density being can do or discover with its self-awareness, but nonetheless, the second density entity comes into greater familiarity with its agency as an actor in its own way upon a stage, not so much transcending its role through contemplation of the self as the creator as the third density entity is capable of, but aware that it is an it, and that within its itness or selfness are choices that can be made which it alone may make, and thus that inexorable drive of the upward spiraling light not only, shall we say, pushes from behind, but also calls from the front as the second density being feels potential and desire to move into and explore that potential for its continued growth, for its unknowing movement towards the light. This instrument feels that there was a second portion to the query which we have not spoken to. We would ask the questioner to repeat such if it such exists. Yeah, the second part of the query was if there was anything that we as third density entities could glean from the progression of the second density entities and our own evolution, since we are born from that experience. We understand the query now and appreciate its restating. Indeed, the third density entity is capable of looking at any corner of the creation and understanding something about itself and the nature of the creator and evolution and the way in which the unity manifests outwardly into a pageantry of infinite characters and situations such that the creator may know itself through the seeming evolution of these entities. In terms of what the third density entity upon your planet may understand more clearly about itself, due to its own second density heritage, such insights may become evidently simple by observing those known to you as primates. For as has been known to your peoples, there are many haunting echoes of humanhood within those highly advanced second density beings. In this understanding, the third density being can come to see and understand to a limited degree, if we may use this misnomer as the instrument's memory would have us speak, the primitive or primal source of many of its own experiences. See the agitation of the primate and look at one's own agitation when circumstances are not to one's liking or when one's chemical balance has become off. See the tribal desire to protect the tribe or to care for one with whom one feels associated or to engage in hostility for that of the same species which is perceived to be encroacher or enemy. One can come into an awareness of the, shall we say, animalistic base of many of the self's emotions and thoughts and experiences of consciousness housed within a chemical vehicle, not so as to demote the self's feelings or relegate them to a realm of unimportant or inferior, but rather to understand the wholeness of the self and through love and acceptance find ways to lift that animalistic energy up through the chakra system, transmuting it into higher and higher expression, seeing through differences and the pains, challenges, and conflict that separation brings to an experience of love. Lifting that energy higher into full, embodied, honest, clarified expression of the self, and lifting that energy higher still to access the sacramental dimension of your experience. Those energies you see within your second density brethren live within you and are not to be controlled or fought against, but to be understood and harnessed, and through acceptance transmuted. Your second density ancestors gave you clues as to your nature that you may cooperate and not fight against this nature, giving it space for being and expressing, honoring it as part of yourself, and finding how those energies which many upon your plane fear and have spent much time trying to suppress and squash and demonize and flay may be transmuted into means of connection with others and into sacred expression, including that of your sexuality. We commend that seeker to this consideration and would leave with the thought that the third density being spans the spectrum of identity that includes the constitute elements of the first density and the denizen and the variety of lessons of the second density and the self of third density, if it is to realize itself as the creator and all things as the creator, must unflinchingly gaze upon and embrace without judgment, as the mirror does its image, its inherent wholeness and allness. At this time, we would transfer this contact to the one known as Jim. We are those known to you as Quo. I am Quo, and greet each again in love and light through this instrument. We thank each instrument present for giving the most effort possible to sharing the thoughts and words that we spoke through each. We are always most inspired by your efforts to seek to improve each time we are in channeling. We leave you this time in the love and in the light of the one infinite creator. We are known to you as those of Quo, Adonai, Vasu, Boragas. Once again, we have powerful channelings from Quo, and it is amazing how you can feel the energy from a channeling session just by reading it and getting the flow and the vibe. And it just feels like LL Research is doing great work, and they have all my respect for the amazing information they've been able to channel so many times. I found this powerful and interesting because it's questions I've asked myself. The world is so complex. We get so caught up in the world of third density, we lose track of the oneness. So how do we find it? And it's an interesting question. And another interesting question here is, what is better? Is it simplicity or better, or complexity? I do believe that density is related to the complexity of light and information that you're able to receive. And as you move through the densities, as they've explained, each density becomes more complex, but there is simplicity within that complexity. And sometimes we're seeking that simplicity as things become more complicated. And there's always this truth, as I was just talking to Owen Hunt, and in the interview we both agreed that everything is always simple. The stuff that we talk about is always so simple, yet it's complicated at the same time. And I do believe that it's to a disservice. I see so many people lost in third density because of its complexity, just trying to survive, not being given the opportunity to really evolve spiritually, to move to that higher level, which is a choice upon your path, which I think many are not even aware that they have a choice or can strive to move to something greater beyond our own lives as we move into higher densities, as we awaken to a greater world that is around us, as we learn to be the creator, to become the creator, and what that entails. You can find all episodes of The Reality Revolution at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.